Hi, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, just wanted to remind everyone to head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and sign up for our Big 3 newsletter. We call it this because, in case you haven't noticed, our team comes up with 3 new pieces of content every week in the form of 2 articles and 1 podcast episode. Rather than remembering to check back with us 3 times a week, we can send it all to you in one single email every Thursday. This weekly digest also includes direct links to any other content that Team 3DMJ coaches are a part of throughout the entirety of the internet. Whether that's guest appearances, interviews, seminars, or courses, you will not miss any of it. So if you like hearing about all the free resources that we have to offer, all the products we sell, all the projects we are a part of, and all the ways you can get discounts, reminders, and early access to them, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com right now and sign up. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. Today I'm joined by Jeff Alberts and Eric Helms as we talk about your athletic identity. You'll hear Eric define this topic and our concerns a bit better within the first few minutes of this episode, so I'm going to keep this intro super quick. In short, while it is useful and motivating to see yourself as a competitor, it can also be detrimental to your progress and mentality if you become too engulfed in it. So this discussion lays out some of our personal struggles with our own athletic identities and some of the ways we've helped ourselves and our athletes find a better balance in order to achieve the benefits we're seeking from our sports without creating unnecessary harm to our psyche. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this specific episode, you can leave them for us at 3dmusclejourney.com under podcast 48. And let's get into it, guys. Here is Assessing Your Athletic Identity with Eric Helms and Jeff Alberts.
So, athletic identity.
Yes.
We should talk about it.
We should, right?
Specifically.
Okay.
Specifically, we should discuss what are the upsides and downsides, if there are upsides and downsides, which there surely are, to seeing yourself primarily as an athlete, and deriving your sense of self-worth and, I guess, life purpose as primarily being, at least for the people who typically follow our podcast, as a powerlifter or Olympic weightlifter or bodybuilder or what have you. So I think probably most of us, at least at some point in our career, see ourselves as what we do.
Right. And I look forward to, I guess, hearing what you guys think about what is an appropriate amount and what is not. Because, like, when you said primarily, thinking of someone as an athlete, I immediately am like, well, sometimes you should. You know?
Why?
Like Jeff in his last 8 weeks of prep, I think it could be useful. Maybe, okay, let me not even talk about Jeff. Like me, I find it to be a very useful mindset at times. I don't think well, y'all might debate this, or we could all debate it, but I don't feel like my whole world revolves around it. But I think for 5 hours a day, it's really useful for me.
Well, I would say that it's certainly, having been someone who had if I had to self-assess in retrospect, which I'm sure is super accurate, if I was to assess myself, say like 2006, 7, 5, when I was first identifying as a bodybuilder, I would guess that it certainly made it easier to be super motivated about my training and bust my ass, follow a diet, do all those things, because it was me, like, and if I wasn't true to myself, if I didn't, live the lifestyle kind of thing. And failure had much higher consequences too, because then it's not just, oh, well, I didn't get to lean as I wanted it, so I'm failing at being, or I'm failing at life, if my purpose is to be an athlete kind of thing too. Right.
And Jeff, you were there at one point too, right?
Oh, yeah.
For a decade or so, maybe 2.
I definitely was a bodybuilder before anything else for a long time. I think once I got into that first prep, it got obsessive, like really obsessive. So yeah, it was like, that's all I really cared about, and definitely that's all I identified myself as. I didn't see myself as like a husband or or even a worker at my job. It was just like, that's something I had to do, Whereas like, okay, bodybuilding was it. That was my main focus, sole purpose. And yeah, it was, I'm not too really proud of that era for me. Where it's definitely a 180 now. Like, yeah, it's totally 180 now, because I look at myself as a dad first, a husband first now. And bodybuilding is just more something like I do as a hobby, something for fun.
Okay. Eric, what are the potential downsides that you tend to see, I guess, in terms of bodybuilders or just in general?
Well, there's actually some cool research in this area, which is why I became aware of it. But the problems, I think, come from when things aren't going well. If things are going great, awesome, right? When you do well as a bodybuilder, if you see yourself as a bodybuilder, life is good. But if you get injured and can't train or can't compete, or if you are unable to meet those self-imposed standards that you see as quote-unquote making you a bodybuilder, then that's when problems really start to crop up. And probably the most, psychologically devastating coaching experiences I've had, not for me, but, watching someone else go through it, has been when someone with a high athletic identity is prevented from competing, or they've had an injury, or they don't know how to deal with it. And then just kind of the wheels fall off and they have this really poor cascade because they're basically losing a sense of self. So I think that's the major downside. And I think a lot of people get stuck there because they don't really know a way to stay motivated and do what needs to be done without that mindset, or at least they think they can't find a new way of thinking. I know that was the truth for me. Like, I couldn't really... It's a strange way of thinking, but I used to convince myself that there was a chance I could be the best bodybuilder on the planet. I was always like, I can be the best.
Wow.
And part of my mindset was that if I couldn't convince myself of being that, then why would I even train?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Would you say that was a little delusional?
Yeah, it was purposely self-delusional because I found it motivated me. Yeah.
Not in a shitty way, but I'm just saying, like, out of every show, like, maybe one or two maybe will make it to Worlds with the Orton, like, sort of out of every 100 or 200, So that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying delusional in the fact that you could be the best bodybuilder you could be, but you actually thought I could be the best there is. Or you're saying
I wanted to be the best natural bodybuilder on the planet, and for me to stay motivated towards working towards that goal, I had to convince myself that it was possible. And of course, I did some intelligent things like chunking it towards, hey, let's get on stage shredded. Okay, next goal is, hey, let's get a pro card. Hey, next goal, which is probably now, let's get on stage and at least look like I belong on the pro stage. But I don't have that. I'm not motivated the same way. That didn't last very long. I'd say by 2008 probably I was thinking differently, and that was actually reflected in how I saw myself and felt as time went on. But it was a difficult transition.
Wow, my mind's like blown right now. I think that's just super interesting. Because, like, when we have talks with the five of us or whatever, what seems like a general trend out of the five of us is that, like, I'm the one that's, like, super highly identified in that way. But I've never, like, even when I was a little girl just getting into gymnastics for the first year or two, I was like, oh, the Olympians, like, yeah, we'll get there one day. And by, like, the time I was 9 or 10, I was like, okay, college scholarship, because I saw the elite kids. I just never thought that way as an adult. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. You know how, like, psychologists often are kind of a little screwed up in their head a little bit, and that's what drove them towards wanting to become therapists and help other people because it's something they had to struggle with on their own.
Yeah.
The reason why we're seen as the team that focuses on, like, individual self-progress and finding balance and having this holistic view is because all of us were fucking crazy when we started. Yeah.
Because we're all fucked up.
Yeah. I was probably crazier and longer than all you guys put together.
Yeah. So I think, Andrea, you're coming into it with you're seeing the people who have kind of reformed and who know the dangers of where they came from and are trying to help others versus you probably wouldn't have liked us very much if you'd met us all when we were like 23.
Like, I'm not judging you. I'm just surprised. I'm not, I'm not like, what an idiot. But I'm just like, whoa. I don't know. I'm not, I was about to say, like, do you feel that way too, Jeff? But, like, you really are one of the top in the world. So that's a little different, I guess, for you. You know what I mean? Not.
I'm trying to think of how I'm.
That wasn't meant to
How I
sound
look at
shitty
that.
either. Eric, I love you. That wasn't meant to
I
sound
wasn't
shitty.
on. I never. I've never said I want to I'm gonna be the best in the world.
Right.
I was just like more like, okay, I have a show on my radar. I want to win that show. So I guess on the same type of a level, it's just a different like goal. Like Eric's is
Just
like
more realistic.
Yeah, a little more realistic.
Well, here's what's interesting though too. Go ahead.
Sorry. But the thing is now I think, okay, it's possible. I mean, if the stars align and I do everything possible, I do everything right, maybe the timing lands my way. It's possible. Whereas maybe like 10 years ago, I didn't even think I was even capable of even being in the shoes I'm in now. So there was a little bit of, I guess, lack of confidence, in myself at that time. But definitely I identified myself as a bodybuilder before as a human. I know that.
Yeah.
For a long time. And it probably wasn't until I met these other guys where it's like slowly started to get a little bit more mature and see things from different perspectives. And I think having a family definitely changes your perspective too, because priorities all of a sudden get changed in an instant.
Yeah. Not to beat a dead horse, but with Eric, I think in one of the podcasts too, you said something about how you decided a long time ago that you wanted this to be your career and you want to be one of the best coaches in the world, but you've, in a lot of people's eyes, done that and walked that walk and saw that through. So I was just trying to think about like how I was like, whoa, shit, you thought that? But then I'm like, wait, but you thought that about coaching and you're there now. So I guess because you have more control over that?
Yeah, I think
you identify, not athletic identity versus like occupational identity now.
Well,
you know?
I think, I definitely want to be seen as like the man in what I do. And I think the good thing is I'm aware of that. So it's not the only thing that drives me. And I'm able to keep that in my back pocket as a little, extra spark plug in my motivation, instead of letting that override my decisions. And primarily what I keep in the front of my mind is trying to help other people so that my ego is subservient to my greater mission statement. But I'm not going to pretend I'm not ego-driven to some degree. I think we all are, if we're honest. Maybe I'm more than other people. It's very possible. I need a few more resurrections before I can come back an enlightened soul, or reincarnations rather. So anyway, but I think I definitely have done some mental acrobatics to stay motivated, and I use my competitive desire in the best positive way I can. And instead of being like, for example, like jealous of others, and this goes back to what Brad's article he just wrote on our blog, is that I find myself more often inspired by what's possible when other people accomplish things. Not saying like I look at Doug Miller and think, oh, I can do that one day. That's not what I'm saying, but more so just seeing that someone has walked that path and probably achieved more than they ever thought they could. Teaches me to not sell myself short as far as what I can accomplish, and more so just keep trying and never give up, and just push as far as you can. You're probably going to get farther than you think. And I'm pretty good at like the whole thing of the cliche saying of aim for the stars, and when you hit the moon, and you'll still hit the moon kind of thing. Like
yes, that one.
Yeah, aim for the stars and you might reach the moon. Like I'm pretty good at getting to the moon and being like, oh, fucking good job, instead of like, dude, the stars are light years away, kind of thing. So, but I don't think I always was good at that.
Okay. This is.
It's interesting what he said because it made me think about, because I always like tend to identify, like when we're talking about myself or something, it's always like from the athlete perspective, like me being the athlete. As far as a coaching perspective, like I've never really thought to myself, I want to be the best coach in the industry or anything like that. It's always about, I'm working with this person and I want to get the most out of this person. I want to help this person the best I can. I've never like put a goal like, okay, I want to get this many pro cards for these athletes or any of that. So this made me think about, like, I've never really thought about that until kind of Eric was touching on that a little bit.
It's probably because you started coaching in a more mature place in your life.
Well, I don't think about that either.
Right?
I don't
I
think
mean, it's
about it
nice
at
when
all.
they get when like okay, an athlete gets a pro card. You're like, okay, there's a sense of pride there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't keep tallies like, okay, I have this many pro card winners or this many pro winners or whatever.
Well, I think it's funny because when I look at myself that way and motivate myself to try trying to be the best in my field, I don't actually think of it just from coaching, because I'm also kind of like a quote unquote, bodybuilding science educator, which is a little bit of a different. I mean, you guys all dabble in that to some degree, but I kind of walk the world of the
You're a researcher.
3D and yeah, I'm a researcher, so I rub shoulders with the Bropocalypse guys and other researchers who put their information out there, and I also rub shoulders with the likes of 3DMJ or your Cliff Wilsons or your folks who are primarily working one-on-one with athletes versus putting out information. So I think more so in like kind of the information world of trying to have the best info or the best or the most useful insights for people is kind of where I kind of see that. Because there's no real way to gauge who's the best coach. That's you can be the best coach for that person at that time, but I mean, I don't really think that's
yeah. What's funny?
I don't think that's a useful way to look at that job, because the job is so much about how you can develop a relationship. Like I'm the best at being a friend, like.
Well, yeah, because to go back to what Jeff said, right? When it comes to coaching, I think about this check-in. What's going to be the best thing for this check-in to get them to that end goal, and that's all I think about is that person. And what's funny
I
is
just want top three. Just top three for each check-in.
Trophies are off the roster. Okay, no. It's funny, when I first started and I had like a really big influx of Skype athletes, and then it was time to roll into season, and I was like, okay, I can only take so many on the roster, and I think there was 2 or 3 I dispersed amongst you guys, and then now I couldn't imagine anyone on my roster being dispersed outward, because I feel like no one could do as good for them as I am, but because they're mine now. You know what I mean? So I don't think of like the best coach ever, but I'm like, but so-and-so doesn't know how they did this last year and how they really like eating this, or they like whatever. They need to help with their posing in this way. And when they compete, they need to hear this talk, and they prefer to text you all the time, but this one needs the messenger, and this one actually needs a phone call the night before, and like all this weird shit, you know what I mean? But that's how I was with my gymnast too. Like, I just hadn't ever thought about it until Jeff said it, but it's like very per person. I've never been like, I want to be this well-known coach. It was just like...
Yeah. It's a very good point that basically the coaching relationship improves over time as you learn each other. And it's a topic for another podcast, but I think a lot of people don't look at it that way. Sometimes they think of, coaching as who's the best coach. Like we're actually joking about looking at it that way. And you really shouldn't, because your first check-in versus your 30th check-in with a person, they're going to be much more effective with you, so long as you're both doing your job,
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing about athletic identity, it's you don't necessarily have to see yourself as potentially going to be the best to have a strong athletic identity. It's more so just how do you value yourself? What do you see your purpose in life? Because if you get your value from being whatever level athlete you are, or just the fact that you compete, or that's your tribe, if you will, and if your purpose in life is to compete and do that, and you can't, that's really where the issues are, regardless of the level it's at, even if you don't necessarily have aspirations of being, Philip Carter Jr. or whatever. So
I want to be him. So on an individual level, what are things that, I guess, signs when you're working with an athlete, they're like, okay, this is actually a problem, that they're overly emotionally invested in being this person?
We've talked about it before. I think the big ones that I see are when they derive more satisfaction from placing rather than improving. That's always a good one,
Jeff just
another
had
one is...
It was an injury thing recently, Jeff, with one of your athletes, right?
Injuries. Yeah.
Yeah. Injuries are another great example.
And it like broke her world, this particular athlete.
Yeah, can't compete now, can't really train the way they want to.
Yeah,
it's depressing,
And I think we also talked about the added pressure of social media is that you often will hyper express yourself through social media. You suppress your parts of the world you don't want people to see, and you overexpress the parts of the world, parts of yourself you want the world to see. So if you have a high athletic identity, you're probably going to have an Instagram title that's like, instead of it just being Eric, it'd be like, bodybuilder Eric or whatever, or
like AV Fit, kind of like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or you might even have an additionally like a business based around what you feel you're good at as an individual. So now you have this self-imposed and self-created pressure from the outside world of now everyone sees me as a bodybuilder primarily or completely, or where my self-worth is. So if I'm now failing and judging myself, I'm also failing publicly and either really in actuality or worried about the judgment I'm going to get from other people. So I think it just kind of serves to turn the volume up on the whole problem.
Yeah, that was terrifying. Looking back at, like you said, 2013, 2014 for me, where it was like, I'm a competitor, and I have videos about being a competitor, and I write articles about being a competitor, and I make ebooks about being a competitor, and I was like, so I should be competing. Not only that, I know I'm in off season, but I can't not look like a competitor, so I should keep it pretty tight. Yeah, that was hard.
Yeah, so you can get people doing things that are ironically worse off for them as bodybuilders because they see themselves as bodybuilders. Like you said, not wasting, but having a very difficult and suboptimal off season because they're trying to stay unreasonably lean for their body because they're aspiring to be the archetype of a bodybuilder rather than what's the best bodybuilder I can be. And that might be 18% body fat in the off season as a guy, just because that's where you kind of settle. And trying to be 12% all the time, even though it seems reasonable on paper, may not be best for you. Yeah. But you will not let that happen because you're trying to be the archetypal bodybuilder. So yeah, it can run you into these unexpected consequences of being worse at the thing you identify as than if you were able to have a more holistic self-identity.
Yeah. And I can say too, like on the flip side, like when you said wasting a year or two, athletically, I would agree. But as a coach, that was really valuable because I've found out that that's not very uncommon. And I've helped probably half my athletes. I'm better at dealing with the transition into the off season because I had such a hard time, I think.
Oh, definitely. And there's value in screw-ups and quote-unquote failures for life and being a better coach, being a better person. But the way you can talk to someone as a coach who has a high level of athletic identity is you tell them you're wasting it because they can only look at themselves through the perspective of seeing themselves as an athlete first. That's why, like, all the things that we talk about around balance and having, a healthier emotional output, the foot in the door for the person who is still in kind of the crazy phase is, hey, this makes you a worse bodybuilder.
Yeah.
And I think we've all done that. Is the first step to getting someone to think about, paying attention to their family or not being a dick is not, hey, you shouldn't be a dick. But it's, hey, believe it or not, this is going to cause you more problems that'll help you, that will get in the way of you competing as a bodybuilder. And then once they actually increase their perspective a little bit, they're going to be a little more open to being a better human. So,
yeah. So a big thing for you is becoming a dad, right, Jeff? Like as far as your priorities. But then he nodded in approval, y'all, just if you're listening.
Yes.
So I on a personal level, right, you already had Ethan, but your last prep, you did something that you don't usually do and tried to stay leaner. Why was that? If you don't mind me asking. Yeah, if you don't mind me asking, was it something similar to what we're talking about?
No, there are different reasons. Just trying to fit the generalization. I'm an older guy now. I've been training forever. I should stay within 10, 15 pounds of stage weight to make life easier for when I do go to prep again. What I found out was just made life harder in the off season because I just felt hungrier, no energy, food focused. So yeah, it was more of a struggle. So yeah, it was in a sense, it made me think about bodybuilding more than I needed to feel more like a human first.
Okay.
So for me, it was like, okay, I'd rather be a little chunky in the off season. I'm a happier person. I can focus more on the more important things in life, especially coming off of a 50-week prep where bodybuilding was a big part of me, so it made sense from that standpoint not to try to follow generalization. Older athlete, X amount of training years, you stay this lane to stage weight.
So you were trying to, like, I guess, so that would be an identity thing too, right? Would you consider that, Eric? Like, he's trying to fit the older bodybuilder guy build that doesn't need that stuff because everyone else.
To a degree, you could say that. You could also look at it just a little more or less psychologically, like he was attempting a tactic that is common among older bodybuilders. Yeah.
I mean, I was experimenting as a bodybuilder, see if that was something that was doable. That would work well. And
that's a good point. I would say
one cool thing that I've seen happen with Jeff, or not really cool, I'm sure it's actually frustrating for him, but interesting mental acrobatics that I've seen Jeff go through since 2009, since I met him, is that he's shifted between I'm very, very motivated by thinking about the competitive aspect of being a bodybuilder to that's a problem. It's causing me issues in life. Now I'm going to go to the other side and be a little more balanced. And like, wait a minute, I'm being actually a little too lax. I need to kind of drill it down. And I've kind of seen him get narrow and narrow and really find a better path over time. But I think I can relate to that, although over a lesser time period and with not as much experience, to as I got further away from seeing myself as a bodybuilder and trying to put some kind of context and subtlety and reining in my athletic identity, is that I've struggled to find the same level of motivation. And the question has been not, is athletic identity good or bad, but rather, how do I maintain the high level of motivation to optimize as much as I can in the context of my life to be the best bodybuilder I can be without having a destructive athletic identity that is not going to be great for when I have to retire or get hurt or whatever, Can
you repeat that twice?
No.
I'm kidding.
Once it's out, it's out. But I was going to...
I can relate to that. Though, because the motivation I have now is not the same motivation I had when I was in my early 20s, when I was so focused on bodybuilding. The fire was like lit 24/7, where it's now it's like it's a different motivation. It's like a commitment drives me, I think, a little bit more so these days. So it's like Eric said, you gotta find that balance of like, okay, when do I turn the light on? When do I turn it down? And when do I turn it off?
Right.
Because it's like that's what I have to do on a daily basis. Okay, from this part of my day, I got my coach's hat on. This is my dad hat. This part of my days, this is the athlete part. So I'm wearing, and some days, like 3, 4, 5 different hats.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I just wore the motivated bodybuilder hat all damn day, then everything else is going to get neglected. And that's going to be bad news, because I've already been down that road once.
Jeff, would you say that the original fire has died and gone, but the riot inside moves on?
Jesus.
He's getting into poetry now.
Oh my God. Like, he doesn't even want to answer. He just had to say that.
His audio slave popped in my head from what you were saying. I couldn't help it.
He doesn't even want an answer. Okay, so what's funny about what you said a little bit ago, or not funny, like haha, but like interesting, is that you said, or I was looking for a psychological, like, well, did you try to do what the older bodybuilder guys do because of this identity thing that is like the topic of this podcast, when you were like, no, I was just trying it out. And so I think what's important about that is when people are like, oh shit, is my athletic identity like kind of fucked because I do these things, where it's like the intention matters, right? So like it's not just I did this, it's you did this, why? And if you did it because you don't know how to survive without it, is different than doing it because you chose to run this little experiment.
Yeah, and I think if his intention had been different, it would have affected his actions afterwards.
Right.
When trying out an experiment, he goes, yeah, that didn't work. I need to be a little heavier in the off season. But if he'd been driven by the, hey, I'm an older bodybuilder, I should be able to stay lean, he would have continued to try it and fail or had negative consequences, or not have made great gains in the off season, or just been a jerk and, ate in the closet or something. I don't know. So.
Deliver pizzas up to his office.
I got a big closet too, so I could probably pound it down in there.
What are some... Jeff pounding it down in the closet.
Hey, giggity.
It's better out in the public, I guess.
That's a good point. Only one requires you to register with the sex offender policies.
There you go.
And that's not a city you want to do that in. Okay.
Mm-mm.
What are other negatives to having an which of course we're not here to like diagnose overly strong to the point of detrimental, but
I don't know. I think those negatives are pretty significant.
Yeah.
The loss of sense, like depression when you if you can't compete anymore, that's pretty bad. I mean, a lot of the research on this is basically looking at retirement because at least you're fortunate in bodybuilding that you can probably compete into your 50s and still do pretty well, and you can keep competing after that. Unlike something like American football, where if you get an ACL tear, you're probably just you have a limited time frame where you can actually play the sport. If you can creatively find a way to overload muscle mass, then and you can restrict calories still, then you can still get on a bodybuilding stage. You may not always be at your best, but compared to previous outings. But I think you can have a long time. But I mean, if there is a point where you can no longer compete, or competing is not worth it for your other things, but you still self-identify as an athlete, I think that can lead to pretty substantial depression and just kind of feeling like life has never had the same worth, or I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Never has that same fire that might have had when you were doing what you felt your life's purpose was.
Right. So to make it about me and all, because I couldn't compete in bodybuilding, I had to find something else that allowed me to be athletically identified / a heightened level of athletic identity compared to what a bodybuilding off season did for me.
Well, let me ask you a question, Andrew, because I actually did want to talk about you, because I would say out of all of us, you've been an athlete the longest part of your life, starting as a gymnast at a very young age. Mm-hmm. I was basically just a competitive, like booger picker when I was your age. When you started. I bet you
were good though. Bet you wanted to be the best in the world. Yeah,
I was the best. Yeah. My nose was always clean, and my fingers were always covered in boogers. Yeah. So anyway.
Oh man.
I have the best boogers. So anyway, so Andrea, let me ask you: do you think you have to be doing something because physical expression and competition is a huge part of your life, or because if you're not doing it, you don't have self-value? Because I do think there's a difference between I enjoy competing, being physical, and pushing myself to the limit versus I have only self-worth through athletic competition. If I'm not doing it, then why am I alive?
I think a lot of it comes from the fact that a lot of my core lessons and values in life I learned through sport. I never thought about it before, but I now that you asked that, I think that's why, because that's how I learned respect. That's how I learned discipline, like even standing in line because it's your turn in the vault, like you do what the coach said. Like there's learned how to struggle. I learned how, like, just everything. I think most people learn that stuff for their parents in school, I'd imagine, and I just spent so many hours in the gym that I think that's home to me. I think that I approach a lot of things in life with the same tenacity, though, not just my sports. So, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
The real test is when you put yourself in a situation where you couldn't do, even no matter how unrealistic the scenario is, how you feel when you go, like, I couldn't do grid, I couldn't do gymnastics, I couldn't do Olympic lifting, powerlifting, or bodybuilding, I couldn't compete athletically. Could I find a way to be happy?
Yeah, I'd be a really good writer, I think.
There you go.
Yeah. And I think, too, it's hard because, like, when I was little, like, you could ask me when I was 8, what do you do? I'm a gymnast. Like, there was gymnasts everywhere. Like, in a little kid, like, you ask them if they're a baseball player, like, soccer player. Carolina's a soccer player. Like, when you're a kid, you don't have a job to associate with, right? Because, like, now you're like, I'm a bodybuilding coach. And, like, at that time, I was like, I'm a gymnast. It's just
and it's not. I think it's important to point out this is not a binary thing. Like, yeah, I either identify it as it or I don't. It's a spectrum. So like when they evaluate athletic identity in a study, it's like, how high do you rate on the score, and then they take that numerical value, which isn't just a 0 or 1, right? And then they run a correlation between that and then other numerical values for like depression or anxiety or self-worth and shit like that.
That said, I get real sad when I'm hurt. And I don't think it's, I don't know, not really though, because if it's something that like I twisted my ankle, there's 6 weeks, damn it, that sucks. But like my shoulder that we couldn't figure out for like a year and a half, that made me like real sad.
Because then you couldn't, there was a potentiality that you couldn't do grid.
Yeah. Or at least not for a long time. And I'm not like a spring chicken so much anymore in that stuff, so.
Yeah, there was even a point, I think it was like in January, February, when I was dealing with all these little nagging injuries. I even questioned myself, like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this anymore. Like, I even thought about, like, let's just stop this prep.
I've never thought that.
It was frustrating, yeah.
Yeah, like, I got frustrated with my shoulder, but it was never... What's good, right, is I guess I feel like I have enough variety of skills as an athlete that if it was for some reason I couldn't do grid, I'm like, okay, then I'll do bodybuilding again. Like... So I think I don't identify, like 2 years ago it was like, I'm a physique athlete, I'm a figure competitor. And now I think it's, rather than I was a gymnast, I was a cheerleader, I was a physique competitor, now it's like, okay, I'm just an athlete. And I feel confident that there's always going to be something for me to do to like for others.
I think that's probably helped their outlook. Because, I mean, how many of us know the guys who were high school athletes, maybe even college athletes? Maybe not. And then when you meet them 10, 20 years after you haven't seen them in a long time, not that I have met them 20 years, I'm not 38, but from some of the people I know from 10 years ago who were big-time high school athletes, without that specific outlet, they've gotten overweight and they're out of shape. And it's surprising to me for someone who, played sports and obviously clearly enjoyed being physical, that they didn't find some way to maintain that. And I wonder if that's not related to seeing themselves specifically as I was the star running back, or I was the, I'm on special teams, or whatever they did.
Yeah.
Then not being able to recreate that same feeling, so they couldn't adhere to an exercise plan or go to a CrossFit gym or whatever the hell outlet it would have formed if they had maybe a more holistic view of part of me as physical expression and the process and action and journey, if you will, of training, versus I have to be a competitive athlete in the sport and good, kind of thing. I
think it's just a theory, right? Whatever. With team sports like that, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that when you grew up in baseball or football or whatever as a young boy, like there was a coach and there were your teammates and you did what the coaches said, but you have no idea like how to do that, I guess, for yourself. Like I immediately, when I was at gymnastics, immediately started coaching. So learning like the pedagogy and how to put things together and like how the body works and blah, blah, blah. But like I think like if you think of a lot of 18-year-old senior boys who grew up playing football, not saying that all of them are like this, but a lot of them, it's like now we go to college and they don't know how to train themselves. There's not a specific meeting time. They don't really know what to do.
They've lost the environment.
Yeah. I don't know, just a theory. But like, I don't think for every, what is there, like 100 kids on how many kids are on a football team? I guess it depends where you live.
Depends on the size of the school.
Yeah.
But I think it probably is a modifier, but I've seen the same in some of the Olympic weightlifters I know, is once they're at a point where because Olympic weightlifting does have a shorter lifespan than powerlifting or bodybuilding. By the time you're 30, that's when you just can't produce the same kind of velocities, and because it's not just raw strength.
Damn it.
You're fine. There's other things in grid. You're fine. Chill out. You're still getting stronger. I'm talking about people who at 25 went to the Commonwealth Games and now just can't seem to get that same total, or maybe they're maintaining the same from like 25 to 28, and they might retire, at their last games in their early 30s, and then they have trouble, motivating themselves to stay performing at the same level.
Yeah.
And not that they necessarily need to maintain like 180 kilo clean and jerk, but the question is why don't they? Or why don't they maintain the highest strength level they can? It seems like that's only motivated by the desire to compete against someone else, and so. Well, and some of them, it's not even, okay, I went from 180 to 160, which would be great. It's more like I went from 180 to I play computer games.
Well, like, Jeff, you've said before that if your physique didn't continue getting better, you would just stop.
I would stop competing.
Yeah. Why?
Like, I think, like, the fear of me could stop not competing doesn't really scare me too much. Just not being able to train would be more fear.
But why wouldn't you want to be a Masters?
That's where. Say that again?
Sorry. Why wouldn't you want to be like a really solid Masters bodybuilder? Doesn't feel the same.
Yeah. I mean, it's taken, in my eyes, like, I think what you're saying is like, okay, because a lot of the guys that are my age on my level are the ones that are the better bodybuilders. So I think what you're asking is, if I can't compete on that level, why don't I just go to like the amateur level master division or something like that?
No, pro masters, it might not be as...
Pro masters are just as good as if not better.
Pro masters are more difficult shows than regular masters.
No, like when you're like 60 or 65, like... I guess, yeah,
it's the competitiveness in me. Like, not so much I just want to be better than myself every time I go.
Okay.
Or at least equal to. But if I start going backwards, then I don't see the point of really getting on stage anymore. That's just me personally.
Right.
Not to say, I might have fun being backstage with the guys and doing that, but from a competitive standpoint, I just don't see the point in doing that.
Okay.
But it would be more the fear of not being able to train or work out. Then it's like, okay, now what do I do? Because I've had those layoffs where I haven't trained or I've been injured and can't train, and you see your physique starting to take a backslide. There are a ton of insecurities that go with it, because you're in a sense, you identify yourself as, like, for me especially, like, people see me as Gritty MJ coach, pro bodybuilder. So when you start to backslide, a lot of those insecurities creep up, and it's like, it's hard to figure out, okay, like Eric's saying, what's going to make you happy other than just like, hey, look, I got big muscles. So that's something that I've even thought about, because I know that's going to come. It's coming sooner for me probably than you guys. So it's been on my mind a little bit. I've thought about it.
Okay.
And that's the question, the real question that Jeff asked is about being happy. It's not whether or not, in my opinion, we're particularly talking about athletic identity of if you couldn't be competitive still, would you get on stage or not? But would you be happy if you couldn't be competitive still, Because I see nothing wrong with someone going, I compete to compete and I enjoy being competitive, but primarily I just love training and, pushing my body the farthest it can go, regardless of what my capacity is at whatever stage of my life, and I'm happy with that. But if they were like, I can't be happy unless I get on stage and unless I'm competitive, then that's where, you've got a problem. You have to do something or you're not going to be happy, which is kind of where we get intersected with it as coaches, is where we're, looking at a bodybuilder and we know that they're doing well and everything makes sense, but they're not happy because of some, in their own head, how they see reality should be isn't matching what's actually happening. And that the difference between happiness and not happiness would just be a shift in their perspective. And that's more often, the issue with athletic identity, in my opinion.
I think why it's so, in my opinion and from the way I feel, the higher than average athletic identity I have or whatever is far less risky in performance-based sport than it was in physique sport. Because when I'm walking down the street, right, the way that I look tells you whether I'm a physique athlete or not, I guess, in our heads. Whereas, like, if you're even powerlifters kind of look pretty jacked most of the time, but, like, if I'm a tennis player walking down the street, like, nobody knows, right? Like, does that make sense? Like, people can see what you do if you look like a freak, and we want to look like freaks. And so the internet sees it, our friends see it, our family sees it, whereas, like, a tennis player, if they hurt their ankle and can't play for 6 weeks, like, everyone around them doesn't know it. But if a figure athlete is 6 weeks post-show, 15 pounds up, everybody around them knows it. Their clothes tell them. You know what I mean?
Well, they're definitely different, and they'll impact you at different points in your life. Like, a successful bodybuilder, like we were talking about, might be able to make that work into their 50s, before they start having issues, assuming they have a high athletic identity. But a bodybuilder who's not that successful trying to be, yeah, that could be a constant stress. On the other hand, a successful tennis player, they will have to deal with the downsides of athletic identity, maybe at late 20s when they break their wrist or something like that. I don't know. So that they have a life crisis earlier.
Yeah. Like, whenever I would gain 5 pounds on purpose as a physique athlete, I would deal with it because I was semi-educated, but I hated it like crazy. Whereas, like, when I couldn't train legs a couple months ago for, like, 3 weeks, and I lost 5 pounds because my legs shrunk, I was like, they're going to come back. It's no big. You know what I mean? Like, I felt very differently about those two things because, damn, I don't know why.
Insecurity.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. And experience helps that a lot. Just knowing how long it takes for things to develop and how quickly things come back when they've actually backslid.
Yeah.
And just that you can't have perfectly lined up vacuum life to where nothing ever bad happens. So
yeah.
When it happens, you accept it as, no, that's normal. That's not an outside of the box occurrence. That's going to happen. And really I just deal with each occurrence in isolation and figure out what's the best response I can have rather than worrying about the occurrence itself. But yeah, I think the interesting, where we should take this conversation, what I think is quite interesting, is how do we maintain the high level of motivation that we have from having a high level of athletic identity, which we all have to some degree, while not being negatively affected by the potential downsides if you can't do your sport or all of that. Because I think that's what's interesting to me is I've done all kinds of mental acrobatics and figured out what do I need to focus on, what don't I need to focus on, and like we talked about, getting the added perspective of experience to help me figure out what's the way that I can stay motivated without going, my sole self-worth is bodybuilding. And we also talked about doing more than one thing, or at least if you do like one thing, do everything in that field like you do, Andrea, like writing and coaching and competing all at the same time, or in my case also getting into the research behind it. I think that way you have a lot more skills that you can derive a sense of self-worth from, that if one of them happens to be something that you can't continue to progress in or do physically, then you've got some things to fall back on.
Yeah.
As our friend Alberto Nunez would say, diversify your happiness portfolio.
Yeah, but that it can still be within athletics or within your sport. But if only competing makes you happy, and like you said, you don't coach or you don't like Brandon take pictures or whatever your thing is, because I just want to make sure people don't hear that as like, oh, so I have to have another hobby. Like, that's not necessarily. You can still love your thing, just like you said, just there's different ways of getting further into it or branching off of it while it still can be your passion.
Also, there's another way to look at it, is that instead of the outcome of your efforts being what you derive a sense of self-worth from, or what you're able to do, rather the qualities of you that allow you to do that. So, for example, instead of just going, right, let's say I'm Jeff, I'm a badass bodybuilder, and that's what I have, a sense of self-worth from, what about the consistency and hard work and patience and critical thinking skills I have to figure out what works best for me and push myself to the point where, I've maximized on the hand I was dealt, So instead of having value in being a poker player, you have value in the fact that you have the mind that allows you to play your hand as effectively as possible, and realize that you can apply that to anything, and that, not just anybody can be a champion, whatever, right? Even if they have great genetics, they still have to get up every day and do it. And they still have to, have the sense of character and the sense of logic and the persistence and the work ethic and the creativity to actually capitalize on that. And maybe there's something to have self-worth in, even if you only do one thing. Just realizing that if you can't do that thing, the skills and the attributes of you that you use to achieve that can be applied to something else, even if you haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah. How, like you said, trying to get the most out of it while not letting it kill you. One thing I would say is not just diversifying your happiness portfolio, but like Jeff mentioned in our last podcast, having a toolbox of things to resort to when they're needed, right? So like I said at the beginning of this, I was like, for 5 or whatever hours a day, like that's all I think about is being an athlete. And then when there's like nothing more I can do at night, really, I mean, I guess that could be argued, but then I go into work and like I feel like the hats are really useful, like Jeff was saying, like he has his dad hat and his athlete hat or whatever. So I don't think it's bad to have like a balls to the wall athletic identity. It just maybe not all the time. Yeah. And then knowing when I'm hurt, that's probably not the best mindset at the time. And so I have to be like, think like a coach when I'm hurt and be like, don't be a fucking idiot. Whereas I also went to the gym on Tuesday knowing I was sick and had to text my coach for him to tell me to go home. And I actually Snapchatted. I was like, hey guys, I'm going to the gym. I feel kind of like shitty, but I'm going to do it anyways. But if I was a coach, I wouldn't tell my athletes to do this, but I'm going to try. And then I texted my coach in mid-workout after like snatch work, and he was like, I was like, I'm just going to do my light gymnastics stuff and go home because I don't feel very good. He was like, just go home now. And I was like, I knew that. Stupid, but it was in those 5 hours a day where I was trying to be hardcore and impress him. Just stupid. Anyways, go ahead, Jeff.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Damn it! I'm sorry. I'm sure it was way smarter than that.
No, I was just going to say that like there's been stages where the identities kind of shifted for me. Like early on, it was like all bodybuilding. Then it was like, okay, there was like off season where I was like, oh, now I'm playing basketball. So now I'm like seeing myself as the bodybuilding got put on the back burner. I was playing basketball and I did myself now more as like a basketball player now. So I started doing different things. But I would say that now that I'm like more mature, family, like different priorities, that is like you said, the hats get changed. And the way I conducted the last prep probably is it's the best physique I put, but what really gave me a even more sense of pride than just the physique was alone was like how I did it. Because basically I was like, okay, the priority shifted. My priority was family first, work, then bodybuilding, last. So it was like prior to that in 2011, I brought a very good physique to the stage there, but it was going through divorce, and bodybuilding was like something I gravitated, like it was at the forefront. It kept me afloat in life. So I was still kind of identifying more as like I was a bodybuilder first before anything else. So 2014 was like a total 180. So that to me gave me a lot more sense of pride, knowing that the route in which I took and the perspective and the priority and the maturity level of how I attained that physique, not only did it make me a better bodybuilder, but also made me a better coach as well. Because now it's like, okay, yeah, if you put your life priorities in order, it makes the bodybuilding a lot easier.
I think,
and that's what I'm getting at right there, man. Like, as Jeff is finding, not to put words in your mouth, but he found a sense of self-worth, and his pride now looking back is on how he did it, not what he accomplished. And I think, like, if you really want to go extreme, like, what if you got paralyzed and went blind, deaf, and dumb? Like, could you still be happy? If you lost everything, could you still be happy? And I think the placing of self-worth on your capabilities rather than on what you've achieved with those capabilities is really important. Because then you're able to realize that no matter what you lose, you're going to be able to apply yourself in a way to still find something of value in this life and still, do something that's worthwhile, that gives you a sense of purpose.
Yeah. Like Jim Rohn has that whatever quote, like, you should want to be a millionaire not for the $1 million, but for who you have to become to be a millionaire.
Or who your parents have to be. Yeah.
Maybe that too. He says it way better than that. But it makes it makes sense. Like, just valuing the road or whatever, however you want to say it. But yeah, the
journey, if you will. Can you say the journey?
We could say that. You could say that. I think identifying as an athlete is one of the primary drivers in my life. And so that's why this podcast, like, it's been something that I feel like is so strong since I was a kid that, like, and it's useful, like, on the daily, that I don't know, it's hard for me to talk about it in such a, I don't say negative light, because it is dangerous, and probably more dangerous than positive, but I get a lot of positive from it.
I don't necessarily think what you're describing is the same thing as athletic identity.
Maybe. Well, then help me with that.
Well,
you do that.
I mean, because you have no problem switching to different sports. You know, you have no problem. Like your first thought was, oh, I'd be a really great writer. Like, you have so many different outlets to express yourself, and you have self-confidence. You may have learned those things through sport, and you may know that you can apply yourself in many different ways. But if I really had to guess, if the chips were down and you lost your legs in a car accident, you'd probably still be doing, like, bench press only meets or something, just because you like to be physical. But the point is that you would be relying on your capability to achieve and produce things, your creativity and your drive, rather than what it was that you were actually doing or producing.
Okay.
I think there's a big difference between that and someone who, gets injured in their first game in the NFL, drops out, and sells cars for a while and commits suicide. They saw that as that was it.
Right.
And once they lost that, what was the fucking point?
Okay.
So I think that's where we run into issues. And for most people, especially people we've worked with, I would say it is a temporary issue. And maybe they would even figure it out on their own. But as coaches, we're trying to help them get some, additional perspective faster and with, maybe a little less negative consequence to their life. Just realizing, no, you tearing your hamstring is not the end of everything. It wasn't just blind luck that you happen to be a bodybuilder. How did you achieve that? And what else can that be put into? And does that mean that you have intrinsic self-worth rather than what you accomplish gives you worth?
What would you call that then? Because that's something that I have used a couple times, especially with my, I have a couple of people that, like, were doing off-season, like, they want to compete in the next 3 to 5 years. And if there's something that they can't quite, they're having willpower problems or whatever, and we'll have the talk of, like, well, how do you, I'm thinking of one person in particular that was really useful, and I was like, do you see yourself as a competitor? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, so if you want that, these are the things that get you there. We had a big talk about her, even though she wasn't competing yet, see herself as a competitor and as an athlete, and it did really, in this particular case, it was very useful for her, in the same way that I think it is useful for me. And if that's not athletic identity, like,
Well, no, I hear what you're saying, because I think some of it's semantics. There's a ton of value in taking something seriously, right? And I've had the same discussion with athletes as well, where it's like, look, you say you want to get on a bodybuilding stage, but you're cheating on your diet.
Yeah.
Like, if a basketball player told me I want to, compete in a basketball game, and they don't go to practice, that's the same thing.
Right.
You're not doing bodybuilding. You're not doing basketball. Sure, it's more complicated than that. It's, you have to feed yourself to live and all that. But no, I totally agree, and I've used the same strategy. But I think simply saying, oh, yes, you're an athlete, but you have self-worth beyond being an athlete is where it comes down to. Like, you can identify as an athlete, but having your identity be as an athlete are not exactly the same thing. Right?
Say that again. I'm not making fun, like Joe was.
No, sure.
Don't say it 5 times fast. Just re-explain it.
You can identify as an athlete. And I would even say that. I'm a bodybuilder. It's something I do. But it doesn't mean I am only a bodybuilder.
Okay.
Right?
It doesn't define you.
Correct. You can identify as an athlete, but if your definition of self is solely being an athlete, that's where you run into problems.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
Okay.
P less than 0.05.
I think too. I don't know if this is worthy of the conversation, but if you're just solely just seeing yourself as an athlete, then chances are you're probably going to affect people around you and not probably the most pleasant way all the time. So not only does it affect yourself, but it also affects people around you as well.
Yeah, I did that shit for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, the way you see yourself becomes the way you behave, right? So if the only thing you have worth or value or skill in is being shredded and jacked, then you're probably not going to be very good at, talking to your family or even
Yeah.
having a family, etc.
What's hard is it's real easy, especially online, but kind of sometimes in real life too, to be around a lot of the same people, and then you don't know you're crazy. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of opposite, right? Like, I remember being alone my first prep, moving to Cali, and I'm like, oh shit, Team 3, Team J, like, we're everywhere. I'm not that crazy. And then I guess it can kind of go both ways, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, on one hand, it's like you find your tribe, like you'd mentioned earlier, and you feel at home in it, versus like now you only like the same people who like what you're like, and you can't function in normal society anymore because y'all all have this weird identity with, like, you all wear the thing, do the thing, and you look the thing. And
Well, yeah, I think one of the worst things you can do for your personal self-development, and this cuts across all of life, is to limit your exposure to people who think the same way you do and share the same opinions
yeah,
and the same beliefs and the same world perspectives.
circle jerk, if you will.
Because I will, and as fun as that can be, and I mean that literally and figuratively. Yeah, it feels good to have your opinions validated and to be told you're right, and to see other people have smart arguments for the same things you believe, and go, oh, that fits my bias. That's awesome, and I think that's natural. And we do that in our social media. We do that with the news we decide to consume. We do that with our political opinions, all this nonsense. But one of the primary way that humans get better at thinking and acting and behaving is by making mistakes and having them corrected, and getting feedback from other people. That's why children put all kinds of random shit in their mouth and try to touch hot stoves, and why teenagers are pushing the boundaries all the time is they're looking for what are the best boundaries so I can behave, whether they understand that consciously or subconsciously, and we continue that throughout life. And if we limit our exposure to the corrections of others, then we're not going to get better, and we're only going to be as good as the group we attach ourselves to.
Yeah. That was so wise, Eric. How'd you get so wise?
He started talking about Kia first thing. When he was saying all that, I started thinking about how I cracked the whip when I needed to, with my kids.
Jeff says, I'll show y'all boundaries. God damn.
You want to identify with that? I'll show you identification.
To identify my fist.
And that's one thing, though, that I can say. Like, if I'm trying to think about how I pulled myself out of it or whatever, because I think mine was a little more, my crazies have been a little more recent than y'all's, was that I had to quit, pretty much quit the online brand and business that was Andrea, this figure athlete, right? I had to quit that. I had to, and which reluctantly, right? And looking back, it was one of the best things I did, but I was like, what am I going to do now? I didn't know what to do, but that, looking in hindsight, that was really useful for me, was getting away from that, and then spending, we talked about this in other podcasts, I used to do nothing but spend every waking moment reading bodybuilding articles online and researching other athletes and how they do stuff and what they were eating and how they were training and da-da-da. And now, other than when I'm doing 3D things, I don't think about that, other than, coach puts my program on the sheet and I go and I do my sheet, but I don't excessively, like, I'm reading other books, I'm writing other things, I'm talking about other things. I mean, it kind of just goes to back what you said, like opening my mind to other skills that I could potentially even have, and then practicing them and working on those. So I do feel like there's other things, I guess. But you saying that helped me realize that really did help me a lot, was to diversify everything about my life. Yeah, I thought at that time everything was like jiving because it was all together. And then like when it was time for like off season, I was like, oh shit, like everything is together. Like, it was the exciting part for a while, and then I was like, I don't know how to undo it.
Well, it's kind of like prep. You're so involved in prep for so long, then when it's gone, then it's like, now what?
Yeah.
Because you identified in that route. You're just like in that routine. You're identifying with the prep life. Now all of a sudden your life it changes.
Yeah.
You're no longer in those same routine.
Yeah.
That's hard to, because I mean, we're trying to transition from getting more body fat back on and feel normal physically, but the emotional part though too, it's like because you're losing that prep identity.
Yeah.
So that can be a hard transition.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most obvious situation where we can all get a little microcosm of what it's like to be totally wrapped up in something and then lose it. Is just that post-contest blues that almost everyone experiences. And sure, there are like physiological drivers that might influence that kind of depressed state, but I do think a huge part of it is you have this one overriding driving goal, and then it comes to an end,
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to stay happy after that.
Yeah.
I get that after vacations, to be honest. Post-vacation blues.
What?
Like when I go on vacation, I'm like really into it and thinking about life, and then I have to go back to the grind. Sometimes I get that little feel of loss. So.
Do you really? Huh.
Yeah.
But you don't take vacations, Andrea. So.
That's because you totally identify with just work 24/7.
You know what? That's a good fucking point. I really do like working.
See, you are you have a grind identity. You just shooting up with Gary V all the time.
No, it's different. It's different. It's different.
You're right. Gary V's a male. That's true.
Now I'm sexist. Damn it, Holmes. No, like well, but I consider like if I'm not making, I'm always inputting. Does that make sense? Like I'm listening or watching something useful that's making me think. I can't stop thinking.
So you're
it's not really working. It's just like
you're a human doing, not a human being.
Yeah.
Like I struggle unless it's like me and Brandon time. We decided we're gonna watch a movie right now, or like we are eating dinner right now. Other than that, if my eyeballs are open, like we're reading or listening or doing, like I don't know how to shut it off.
So you meditate pretty frequently, is what you're saying?
I'm so bad at it. I've tried. I'm so bad at it.
That doesn't surprise me.
Oh, it's so hard.
So inside your brain, there's a hamster on a wheel and it never stops.
Yeah, he's like a real fit hamster.
A real jacked hamster, yeah.
Yeah.
Cartwheeling in the wheel. Yeah.
That had nothing to do with this podcast. Don't pick on me. Anyways, I think we covered it. I guess solutions. Did we go over that? Yeah, expand your...
Yeah, we've kind of come in and out of it. I think, I guess focusing on the qualities of yourself that allow you to do what you're doing rather than what you're doing as a sense of self-worth. I think that's pretty important. Do more things, engage socially, get a family or a life or friends, write, create. I'd say, do things that your body is probably going to fail faster than your mind. So give yourself some things to do mentally and don't limit your exposure to new things.
I think you said people, though, and I think that's important, is a really common thing that we see is not only people gravitating towards each other, like we said, like-minded. I only hang out with other bodybuilders. I only follow other bodybuilders on Instagram, blah, blah, blah. But that hermit-like thing, like we're made... I was a hermit, and I forget that we're made for human interaction. Not just on the internet, but like you're made for people. And I think that's hard for bodybuilders, especially like single bodybuilders or like that don't have kids.
Yeah, it's not hardcore to shut yourself in a room so you never have any distractions, so you can easily stick to the lifestyle.
I was close to the kitchen.
Easy. Yeah, it's easier. I mean, obviously it comes at a cost because no one's an island. But yeah, like you were saying, Andrea. But of course, there's a time and a place to limit distractions. Certainly, I don't think you need to be, when you're 3 weeks out from a powerlifting meet, reading new articles on training. Like you're just going to get in your own head and screw yourself up. Yes, you want to read articles about training so you can question and improve what you're currently doing. But there's a time and a place to go. I just need to focus on action and accountability to what I'm doing. But just like you may not go to social events for the last 4 weeks of your competition because you're starving and you don't need the additional stress. But yeah, like you were saying, Andrew, ideally when you're in a place where you can handle the stress of being challenged, which is something we all need to do in our life, is open yourself up to it so that you can expand your horizons. And so if you're everyone is brings a food scale to dinner, then maybe you need a few additional friends,
That's good. Anything else, Jeff?
No.
He did good, huh?
Jeff, do you think it's... Let me ask you a question, Jeff. Do you think it's a good thing that we have... Our significant others have typically not been bodybuilders or powerlifter types? Because I know that many of the people in our community have they'll only date fit chicks or jack guys, you know?
I think for me personally, it's been terrific not having someone doing the same things that I'm doing. I think for me, it's been healthier. And I after the divorce, when I was like, okay, let me get back out there, I remember Brad telling me, oh, you're going to, get yourself a hot figure chick. And I'm like, nah, I don't even want no one who's remotely like me at all. Because it's just, yeah. And I would say that, yeah, I mean, Susanna basically is total 180 for me. So she's definitely got me out of my comfort zone, which has definitely helped me to grow as a person.
Yeah. And I think also, don't get us wrong, like, I fell in love with who I fell in love with. That's just my wife. But, and she has actually competed in figure and powerlifting. However, she didn't even lift weights when I first met her, and there's nothing wrong, of course, with dating someone who you met through the sport. It's just, if neither one of you expands each other's horizons, that's just not a good, really, relationship, regardless of whether you're both pilots and you only hang out with pilots, or you're both bodybuilders and you only hang out with bodybuilders. Or
so y'all are talking shit about Brandon? Is that what's going on? Basically.
Right, because he's not like an artist and a photographer and a musician.
No, yeah, I think that's a good point, is we're both competitors. We handle it real different. I get real crazy, and he's like, oh, I forgot you're prepping. Like, yeah, we handle it very different. He's still the... I handle prep the way I handle life, and he handles prep the way he handles life. And they're all very different. They're opposite.
I just...
Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to point out, I wasn't saying it's bad to be with
No, I know, but I was trying to give an example of, like, we met each other because of 3D, but we complement each other.
Right.
Like how...
You guys help each other grow.
Yeah, but we're very... we were both athletes, but we're both very different athletes, is what I'm saying. Not that you can't be the same as your person, but if I had another neurotic, OCD, overly structured, can't shut the fuck up person, it probably wouldn't work out, is all I was saying.
Yeah, I think you'd actually just generate some kind of cosmic explosion in your house.
Maybe. Go ahead, Jeff.
Maybe. That's nice of... Fuck you.
That's the end of the podcast right there.
All right. I'll talk to y'all next week.